debate on the motion in the name of the member for Dawson.
The member for Dawson.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Sugar is one of the backbone agricultural industries of Queensland and the nation. The Australian sugar industry is one of the world's most efficient and innovative producers and exporters of sugar, and the leader in the adoption of sustainable farming practices. Indeed, as a nation, we are actually the third largest exporter of sugar in the world. We have some 6,000 sugar cane growers in Australia, some 4,000 mainly family farms growing sugar along Australia's eastern seaboard, and there's more in the west coast near the Ord. The sugar industry directly and indirectly employs and supports 40,000 jobs throughout Australia and underpins the economic stability of many coastal communities, particularly in Queensland. In that state, I have to say sugar is the social fabric that has woven itself through the development of towns up and down that state's coastline. Now, the sugar industry has seen its fair share of challenges. Cane growers have battled on amid floods and bad weather, the deregulation of their industry, a corrupt world market, the forward pricing debacle that was recently had, and also cane disease such as smut, orange rust and now yellow leaf. These have all been the enemies from within for the sugar industry. But in recent times, the sugar industry has also faced attacks by enemies without. And those enemies take the form of the nanny state brigade, who would seek to regulate and control the consumption of sugar, as if we, the consumers, were all children who need to be told what to do, with the end result being a contraction of the sugar industry, putting those 40,000 direct and indirect jobs associated with the sugar industry at risk, putting the livelihoods of those 6,000 cane growers and in Queensland the near 4,000 farming families at risk right around this nation. When I was a child, there was this television advertisement which was done by, I believe, the Cane Growers Organisation, and it told us that sugar was a natural part of life. Today, we are told by this chorus of dietetic dictators that sugar is a poison, that sugar is toxic, and that sugar is addictive, akin to drugs like heroin. Well, these self-styled experts who use these words preach selective and mostly anecdotal information about sugar and health, which basically seeks to undermine consumer confidence in the safety of sugar. They demonise sugar, not based on sound evidence, but on opinion and conjecture. Now, the nanny state brigade claim that sugar is one of the key nutrients that are instrumental in the development of obesity. The reality is there have been a number of major expert committees around the world that have looked into these exact claims, and all of them have concluded that there is no evidence of harm attributed to current sugar consumption levels. Indeed, in this country, the National Health and Medical Research Council did a recent scientific review for the Australian Dietary Guidelines, and they found in that review no conclusive link between sugar intake and obesity. In fact, they gave the papers that tried to peddle the story about a link between sugar and obesity a grade of D, which is akin to the D that you get on a report card at school. In other words, a fail. They noted the evidence based for that, the evidence base for the claims that there was a link between sugar and obesity was poor, and that the studies were inconsistent, and that it was difficult to separate changes in total energy consumption from changes in sugar consumption. Now, I just wish the NHMRC would have listened to their own advice, because they also went the way of the nanny state do-gooders by changing the Australian Dietary Guidelines from recommending that people should, quote, consume only moderate amounts of sugars and foods containing added sugars, to recommending that people should, quote, limit intake of food and drinks containing added sugar, in particularly limit sugar-sweetened drinks. That change could now be used to influence Food Standards Australia and New Zealand to set standards for food production in this country. Now, the World Health Organisation, no less, has found that the fundamental cause of obesity and being overweight is an energy imbalance between the calories consumed and the calories expended. So it's more complex than just removing sugar from the equation. There are calories outside of sugar, and there is the question of exercise. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I am no poster boy for public health, but I have to say that I cannot and do not blame sugar for my physique. It did not come about by putting too much sugar in my cups of tea. It did not come about because I selected only products with added sugar in them. It came about because of poor decisions to do with dieting, consuming foods high in fats and calories, and a lack of exercise. So I blame myself, not sugar, for my weight gain. And the facts speak volumes when it comes to sugar and obesity. The Greenpool Commodity Specialists report last year compiled a report entitled Sugar Consumption in Australia, a Statistical Update. The report found that sugar consumption in Australia had actually fallen by 9.3% over the past 8 years, from 46.26 kilograms per person per year in 2004 to 41.97 kilograms in 2011. The report also found that over the past 60 years, consumption of sugar in Australia had fallen by 15 kilograms per person per year. That's a 26.4% drop from the peak of 57 kilograms per person per year in 1951. Now, no one can say in those same timeframes that obesity has declined in this country. This was actually found in a paper entitled The Australian Paradox, a statistical decline in sugars intake over the same time frame that overweight and obesity have increased. And the name of the report says exactly what the report found. One of the authors of that report was Professor Jenny Brand-Miller, who actually holds a personal chair in human nutrition in the Bowden Institute of Obesity, Nutrition, Exercise and Eating Disorders at the School of Molecular Bioscience at the University of Sydney. The other author was Dr. Alan Barkley, the Chief Scientific Officer at the Glycaemic Index Foundation and a spokesman for the Dietitians Association of Australia. Now, the Dietitians Association of Australia have also come out saying that this attempt to demonise sugar and link sugar directly to obesity is not helpful. The same view is shared by the Australian Diabetes Foundation. Now, Dr. Alan Barkley, who I've just talked about before, he is actually quoted as saying, "Sugar is not the issue, it is far more complicated than that." He goes on to say, "Casting sugar as the ultimate villain and calling for regulation is misleading, unfounded and unnecessary." Now, despite the facts that are on the table, this demonisation of sugar continues to be peddled in the press, almost unchallenged, and now it is leading the Nanny State Brigade to call for a tax based on the content of a sugar in a food. Now, in other words, a sugar tax. Now, other countries have introduced such a tax, including France, Finland, Norway, Hungary and Denmark, with little or no impact on obesity levels. Now, I note Denmark actually repealed its sugar tax because it has an impact on industry and jobs. But there's no surprise when you find a failed policy with industry collapse and job losses that you also find the Greens. Now, last week, the Greens in Tasmania, the Tasmanian health spokesman, publicly called for the introduction of a sugar tax. He said, "The proposal for a federal sugar tax has merit, as the obesity epidemic means that all options must be seriously considered." And this is not just some thought bubble by a lone Greens MP, it's actually Greens policy. It's Greens policy that was actually announced by their former leader, Bob Brown, at the tax summit in 2011. Now, Bob Brown said that a sugar tax should be introduced. Now, as we've seen with so many other issues, including the carbon tax, that where the Greens push, Labor often follows. But it won't take much of a push, because back in 2009, my immediate predecessor as a member for Dawson, James Bidgood, called for a tax on food with a high sugar content. And that, I've got to say, is a disgrace for a person who is being a representative of a sugar seat. So now we have the chance to unite in this parliament, Labor, Liberal, National, Katter Australia Party and maybe even the Greens. I do dream, I know, but now is a chance to unite behind this motion and rule out a sugar tax from ever happening in Australia. The industry needs to be supported, it needs to be strengthened, it needs to be assisted through the removal of red tape and green tape and the opening up of new markets. What it does not need, what it never needs, is the demonisation of its product, sugar, and a great big new tax on sugar. Now, I ask the House to support the sugar industry, to support cane farming families and to support